The morning had been flawless, just like every morning in Corinne Mitchell's carefully constructed world. She'd woken at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes before her alarm because her body had been trained through years of discipline to reject the indignity of the snooze button. Her meditation app had already been cued. The lavender diffuser in her master bedroom hummed softly, filling the space with the precise scent that appeared in her aesthetic Instagram feed. Everything was curated. Everything was controlled. Her husband David had already left for his 6:00 a.m. spin class, the one she'd suggested he take on Tuesdays and Thursdays to give her sacred alone time. What David didn't know was that her sacred alone time involved scrolling through the comments on her lifestyle blog posts while sipping her third cappuccino of the day. The blog had 847,000 followers. 847,000 people who believed that Corinne Mitchell had the answer to modern living. Minimalism with luxury, discipline with self-care, success with grace. None of it was true, but the truth was far less profitable. By 9:00 a.m., Corinne was already at Whole Foods, pushing a cart through the produce section with the kind of focused intensity most people reserved for hostage negotiations. She was building the centerpiece for tonight's dinner party, a carefully orchestrated evening where she would serve pan-seared duck breast with a cherry gastrique, artisanal focaccia, and a wine selection that would make her guests feel both sophisticated and inadequate in equal measure. The guest list had taken 3 weeks to finalize. She'd invited the Hendersons, too wealthy to dismiss, too boring to enjoy, the Rothschilds, David's business partners, necessary evil, and the Changs, Jessica Chang in particular, who ran a competing lifestyle blog with 756,000 followers. Jessica had been gaining 2,000 new followers per week lately. Corinne had been gaining 3,200. The competition was subtle, but it was very real. Corinne's phone buzzed. A text from her interior decorator. "Can we schedule the living room consultation? I'm thinking we need to talk about that color palette." Corinne didn't respond. She was in the zone, the sacred zone where nothing else existed except the construction of perfection. She moved through the store like she owned it because in a way she did. The manager knew her by name. The produce supplier held the best arugula for her arrivals. The world bent slightly to accommodate Corinne Mitchell, and she'd grown accustomed to this bend. She expected it. At 10:47 a.m., she pulled into the parking lot of Sovereign Bank on Maple Avenue, 15 minutes ahead of her scheduled appointment. Punctuality was a form of respect, and Corinne had decided long ago that respect was the least the world owed her. She had an appointment to refinance her investment property, a small apartment complex she owned in the Arts District, which she'd purchased with money from her lifestyle brand, but presented to everyone as part of her forward-thinking real estate portfolio. The portfolio was mentioned frequently in her quarterly newsletters. The parking lot was moderately busy. A few other customers came and went. A young mother struggled with a toddler and a stroller near the entrance. A construction worker in a high-visibility vest sat on a bench eating a sandwich. An elderly man shuffled toward the ATM. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that would suggest that in exactly 43 minutes, the careful architecture of Corinne Mitchell's life would begin its collapse. She sat in her car for exactly 2 minutes before entering the bank, checking her appearance in the mirror. Everything was perfect. Her makeup had been applied with the precision of a surgeon, foundation blended to absolute smoothness, contour applied in the exact shadows that suggested cheekbones without appearing obvious, lips lined and filled to the exact shade of confident nude. Her hair had been blown out that morning at the salon, each wave styled to perfection. Her outfit was a carefully constructed ensemble. Cream linen pants, a tasteful silk blouse in sage green, a Hermes scarf tied just so, and Gucci loafers that cost more than most people's car payments. She looked like success, that was the whole point. Inside the bank, the appointment went exactly as planned. The loan officer, a nervous man named Derek who clearly recognized her from her blog, offered her a rate that was significantly better than she'd expected. She'd smiled graciously as though she'd known all along that she was too important to negotiate with. They'd discussed the paperwork. She'd signed documents with her fountain pen, the one with her initials engraved in gold. The meeting had taken 23 minutes, everything on schedule. Walking back to her car at 11:34 a.m., Corinne felt the familiar satisfaction that came from executing her day with military precision. The parking lot was warmer now, the sun higher and more insistent. She could feel perspiration beginning to form at her hairline. She made a mental note to touch up her makeup before the dinner party. Even perfection required maintenance. She was reaching for her car door when she heard it. "Excuse me, excuse me." A young woman was jogging toward her across the parking lot, not running exactly, but moving with purpose. She was in her early 30s, Karen would guess, wearing athletic clothes, a sports bra and yoga pants, her hair in a messy bun. She had the look of someone who'd come from the gym, which meant she'd come from the gym, which meant she hadn't been to the bank. So where was she going? Why was she running toward Karen? "Hi, oh my God, I'm so glad I caught you." The woman was slightly out of breath, her face flushed. "I just wanted to say, I've been following your blog for like 3 years and I absolutely love it. Seriously, you've changed my life." Karen blinked. This was the script. This happened at least 3 times a week, followers recognizing her, stopping her, telling her how much her content meant to them. She had a response prepared, a smile that appeared reflexively, a version of gracious humility that suggested she was blessed by their kindness but also clearly deserving of it. "That's so sweet," Karen said, already turning back toward her car. "Thank you so much for following along on my journey." "I'm serious, though," the woman continued, her enthusiasm undimmed by Karen's obvious attempt at closure. "Like that post you did about maintaining work-life balance? I read it like 4 times. I actually changed my whole schedule based on your advice. And those kitchen organization hacks. I literally bought all the containers you recommended." Karen paused. There was something in the woman's tone that felt off. Not malicious exactly, but with an undertone that Karen couldn't quite identify. Gratitude? No, there was something else underneath. "I'm so glad," Karen said, reaching for her door handle again. "Actually, I have to ask you something," the woman said, and now Karen could see that her smile had shifted. The enthusiasm was still there, but it had transformed into something sharper. "Something I've been wondering for a while. In that post about your digital detox week, you know the one, where you said you didn't touch your phone for 7 days? How did you schedule all those posts during that week?" Karen's entire body went cold. "I'm sorry," she heard herself say, though the voice sounded strange and distant. "The digital detox week," the woman repeated more slowly now. "You posted every single day. Instagram, Twitter, your blog, TikTok, all of them. You even responded to comments in real time. But you said you didn't touch your phone, so I'm just wondering. How?" The smile on the woman's face was no longer friendly. It was something else. Something like the expression a prosecutor might wear when presenting evidence. Karen's mind raced. She could feel her heart rate accelerating, blood pressure rising. She'd made a mistake. She'd posted those updates from her assistant. There had been a scheduling mishap. She could explain it. She could say it was automated content. She could say many things. "My assistant," Karen began. "Right, your assistant," the woman interrupted. "The one you said in that video doesn't exist. The one where you said you do everything yourself because you believe in authenticity." The words hung in the parking lot air like something poisonous. "I'm not sure what you want from me," Karen said, and she was surprised at how steady her voice sounded. "I'm very busy." "I want to know why you lied," the woman said simply. "I want to know why I followed your advice, rearranged my entire life, bought all your recommended products, and it turns out you're just making it up as you go along." Karen felt something shift inside her, a tectonic movement, something fundamental breaking. She'd spent years managing her image, controlling the narrative, presenting a version of herself that was aspirational and unattainable. And now, standing in a parking lot on a Tuesday morning, some stranger in yoga pants was dismantling it like a house of cards. "I don't know what you think you know," Karen said coldly, "but I'd appreciate it if you'd step away from my car." "I already know what I need to know," the woman said, "and so will everyone else when I post this." Karen saw it then, the phone in the woman's hand raised to shoulder level, the small red recording light at the top. Filming. She'd been filming the entire conversation. Something in Karen's chest ignited. Without thinking, without calculating the consequences, without considering that every action has a witness, Karen reached out and shoved the woman backward. It wasn't a hard shove. It was almost reflexive, a movement born from panic and rage and the desperate need to stop what was happening. The woman stumbled backward, her phone flying from her hand, clattering against the asphalt. "Don't you ever," Karen hissed, "film me without permission." The woman looked shocked, her hand moving to her wrist where she'd caught herself. Around them, the parking lot had gone quiet. Karen could feel eyes on her. A man loading groceries into his trunk had gone still. The young mother with the stroller was staring. The construction worker on the bench had paused mid-chew. and every single one of them had their phones out. Karen didn't understand it immediately. She didn't yet grasp what was happening. She was operating on pure adrenaline and indignation, her mind still stuck in the moment where the woman had threatened her image. "You pushed me," the woman said, her voice now carrying the tone of someone who'd just been validated. "You pushed me, and everyone saw it." Karen looked around then, really looked around, and understood with a creeping horror that the parking lot had transformed. It was no longer just a parking lot. It was a theater, and everyone was recording. By 12 minutes, it had been reposted to TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. By 22 minutes, it had accumulated 47,000 views. By the time Karen arrived home, driving far too fast, her hands shaking on the steering wheel, her mind fractured into 1,000 pieces of denial and panic. The video had been viewed 3.2 million times. The title was already established. "Wellness influencer attacked me in parking lot 4, calling her out, Karen Mitchell exposed." Karen sat in her car in her driveway for 13 minutes without moving. Her phone was vibrating constantly. She turned the volume off, but she could see the notification counter climbing. Emails, texts, Instagram DMs, Twitter mentions. The internet, in all its infinite appetite for scandal and vindication, had found fresh meat. She forced herself to open Twitter. At Karen Mitchell Wellness was already trending nationally. She forced herself to read the first thread, though every word felt like a small incision. "So I confronted Karen Mitchell about her fake digital detox posts, and she literally pushed me. When I asked her about the contradictions in her content, she got violent. Everyone in the parking lot saw it. Everyone recorded it. She thought she was untouchable, but the internet doesn't forget." The thread continued with screenshots of Instagram posts, marked up side-by-side comparisons of her claimed schedule versus her actual posts, receipts of product recommendations that had flopped, testimonials from people who'd bought her courses and found them generic and unhelpful. Someone had already created a 17-minute supercut of Karen Mitchell's lies, set to dramatic music. It had been viewed 8.9 million times in under an hour. Karen's phone rang. "David," she answered automatically. "Karen, what the hell is going on?" His voice was tight, controlled, which somehow made it worse than if he'd been yelling. "I'm getting calls from the office. My partners are asking me what's happening." "I don't know," Karen said, and she was crying now, the first real tears in probably a decade. "David, I don't. There was this woman in the parking lot, and she was filming me, and she was asking me about the blog, and I pushed her. I didn't mean to, You pushed someone?" David's voice had shifted to a register Karen didn't recognize. "Karen, there are 700,000 people watching a video of you pushing someone. It's not just trending, it's everywhere. CNN is talking about it. CNN." "I didn't mean," Karen began. "That doesn't matter anymore," David interrupted, and the thing in his voice now was betrayal. "What matters is that you did it. What matters is that apparently everything you've built is fake. Everything. The blog, the courses, the whole thing. People are digging now. People are finding things. Karen, someone already posted a side-by-side comparison of your Instagram photos versus the original images you posted 5 years ago. The colors are different. The lighting is different. You've been editing your life." "Everyone edits," Karen whispered. "Not like this," David said flatly. "Not to this degree. Not while claiming to be an authenticity expert. I have to go. I have to call our lawyer. I'll be home at 6. The line went dead. Karen sat in the car watching the notification counter climb. 43 new emails, 127 new Instagram DMs, 892 new Twitter mentions. The comments on the original video were a river of fury and glee, some righteous, some just hungry for blood. "I knew something was off about her," one comment read. "This is what happens when you build an empire on lies," read another. "Can we please investigate all the products she recommended?" A third suggested, already beginning the real detective work of internet justice. Karen finally stepped out of the car and went inside. The house felt different, colder. The afternoon light streamed through the white linen curtains she'd specifically chosen for her Pinterest aesthetic, and suddenly the space felt like a museum of delusion. Everything had been arranged for the camera, for the carefully curated photos she took of her life. The decorative bowl on the coffee table, filled with greenery and white stones, it served no purpose except to photograph well. The throw pillows, exactly arranged on the linen sofa, she'd never been comfortable on that sofa. The kitchen, With its open shelving displaying her collection of beautiful, barely used cookbooks, she ordered takeout 5 nights a week. She walked to her office, her creative sanctuary as she called it in her content, and closed the door. Her computer screen still showed her unfinished blog post, Finding Joy in the Mundane, How to Build Beauty into Everyday Life. The words seemed obscene now. Her phone buzzed, a text from Jessica Chang, her competitor. "Girl, I don't know what to say, call me." Karen didn't call. By 2:00 p.m., the first major brand had dropped her. FitFlow, the yoga app she'd been partnered with for 2 years, released a statement. "We are aware of recent events involving Karen Mitchell and have made the difficult decision to end our partnership effective immediately. We are committed to working with creators who embody the values of integrity and authenticity that our brand represents." By 2:47 p.m., 3 more brands had followed suit. By 3:15 p.m., someone had launched a Reddit thread dedicated to cataloging every lie she'd ever told on her platform. It already contained 374 entries, complete with screenshots and evidence. Karen's mother called at 3:23 p.m. Karen didn't answer. She couldn't. Her mother had been telling people for years that Karen was a social media influencer, which she'd pronounced like it was the most embarrassing thing in the world. Now her mother would have to tell them that she was a disgraced influencer, which was somehow worse. The dinner party. Karen's eyes widened. The dinner party was tonight. The Hendersons, the Rothschilds, the Changs, Jessica Chang. She had to cancel. She had to send a message. What could she possibly say? Before she could decide, another message arrived. The Hendersons. "We're so sorry to hear about your situation. We don't think it's the right time to gather. We hope you understand." The Rothschilds simply didn't respond. By 4:00 p.m., when David came home, the video had been viewed 12.3 million times. The hashtag Karen Mitchell Exposed was trending on 4 different platforms. A news outlet had tracked down the woman from the parking lot. Her name was Sarah Chen, a personal trainer and part-time blogger, and she'd given an interview in which she was eloquent and sympathetic, explaining how she'd wanted to ask Karen privately first, but Karen had gotten defensive. Karen had gotten defensive. As if that explained it, as if that justified it. David found Karen sitting in the dark living room, her phone dark in her lap. He didn't hug her. He sat down across from her and said, "We need to talk about damage control." "I think it's too late for that," Karen said quietly. "It's never too late," David replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "We hire a crisis PR firm. We craft a statement. We take responsibility for the parking lot incident, but we separate that from the blog content. We say the blog incident is a matter of creative interpretation." Karen looked at him, really looked at him, for probably the first time in years. She saw a man who'd built his career on financial services, a man who understood risk management and liability mitigation and the careful dance of public perception. She saw someone who'd lived alongside her through all of this, eating the dinners she claimed to cook from scratch, wearing the clothes she claimed to thrift, attending the events she used as content, and somewhere along the way, forgetting or perhaps never knowing that his wife was a professional liar. "I can't," Karen said. "Can't what?" "I can't do this anymore. I can't craft a statement. I can't do damage control. I can't separate the incident from the lies because they're not separate. It's all the same thing. It's all me just performing." David's jaw tightened. "So what, you're just going to let this destroy us?" "I don't know," Karen said, and it was the most honest thing she'd said in years. "I don't know what I'm going to do." By 6:43 p.m., her blog had lost 143,000 followers. Her Instagram had lost 267,000. Her TikTok had been ratioed into oblivion, every video suddenly flooded with comments about her hypocrisy. Her email list had seen a 58% unsubscribe rate. The empire that had taken 6 years to build was collapsing in real time. Karen's phone rang again, her lawyer whom David had retained. The lawyer was calm and professional and explained the potential liability issues. The parking lot incident could be prosecuted as assault, though Sarah Chen would need to press charges. There could be civil liability. The lies, while unfortunate, were not technically illegal. She hadn't broken any FTC regulations, though that wouldn't stop people from filing complaints. "What do you recommend?" Karen asked. "I recommend you prepare for your life to get significantly worse before it has any chance of getting better." the lawyer said. People have already hired private investigators. The internet is very motivated to find everything you've ever done wrong. He wasn't exaggerating. By midnight, someone had found a photograph of Karen from 15 years ago, before she'd had work done, before she'd discovered the specific shade of blonde that suited her image, before she'd cultivated the persona. They'd posted it side by side with her current photo with the caption, "Same energy as someone who claims to be all natural and no filter." The photo had been liked 1.2 million times. Karen stood in the shower at 1:00 a.m., washing away the carefully applied makeup that had been her armor for so long. The water was hot, almost too hot, but she didn't turn it down. She watched the foundation-tinted water swirl down the drain, watched the mask of Karen Mitchell disappear. She'd spent the night scrolling through the internet, watching her life be dissected and reassembled into something that looked less like a life and more like a case study in narcissism. Psychology professors were already using her as an example of influencer culture gone wrong. Life coaches were recording videos about her as a cautionary tale. Comedians were writing jokes about her. The Nashville Scene had published an article, "The Influencer and the Fall: How Karen Mitchell Built an Empire on Authenticity and Sold Her Soul to Maintain It." It was devastatingly well-researched. It detailed her entire rise, the early days when she genuinely cared about helping people, somewhere around year 2, when she'd realized the money potential and shifted her focus, the gradual evolution into outright dishonesty. It quoted former team members who described her obsession with metrics and aesthetics over substance. It included screenshots of her private messages where she'd referred to her followers as marks and easy money. Karen didn't remember some of those messages. She might have deleted them, or she might have just forgotten them, forgotten the version of herself who'd written them. The article ended with a comment from an unnamed, close friend who said, "Karen used to be kind. Then the followers started coming and kindness became inefficient." Karen threw her phone across the room. It hit the wall and fell onto the floor with a crack that spread across the screen like a fracture in a windshield. It felt appropriate. David was sleeping in the guest room now. They hadn't discussed it, but after he'd come home Wednesday morning, coming from the office early, having apparently decided that the office was no longer safe, he'd simply taken his pillow and walked downstairs. Karen hadn't stopped him. She sat in the kitchen at 6:47 a.m. making coffee when she heard her phone ringing from the living room where it had fallen. She considered not answering it. The ringing felt accusatory, like the phone was saying, See what you've done? Now everyone knows, now everyone is calling." But she answered. It was Sarah Chen. "Hi," Sarah said, and her voice was different than it had been in the parking lot. It was softer, uncertain. "I hope it's okay that I'm calling. I got your number from a mutual friend. Actually, I have to tell you, I'm not who you think I am." Karen's stomach clenched. "What do you mean?" "I mean, yes, I did confront you in the parking lot. That was real. But what you don't know is why." Sarah took a breath. 6 months ago, I was in really bad shape. I'd gone through a divorce, I was depressed, I wasn't working. I found your blog through a recommendation and your content about rebuilding your life after hardship. It saved me. It actually saved me. I read your essays, I took your course on finding purpose, and I genuinely believed that you understood what I was going through. I believed in you. Karen said nothing, she couldn't. "But then," Sarah continued, "I started noticing inconsistencies. I'm an analytical person. I was a data scientist before I became a trainer, and I couldn't stop looking at the timeline. You claimed you built your empire from nothing, but there's a gap in your content from 2015 to 2016 where you don't post anything. I was curious, so I dug. And I found that in 2015, your father passed away, and you inherited something like $500,000. You don't mention that. You claim you bootstrapped everything from your blog income." Sarah paused. "I wasn't going to confront you about it. I was going to just stop following you, let it go. But then my friend, a friend who has a chronic illness, took your complete wellness course, which cost her $397. It didn't help her. But it convinced her that her illness was somehow caused by her mindset, not biology. She stopped taking her medication because you suggested that medication was a symptom of a lack of faith in your body's healing." Another pause. Karen could hear Sarah breathing on the other end. "She ended up in the hospital," Sarah said quietly. "She's okay now, but she could have died. And I realized that this wasn't just about you being inauthentic. This was about actual harm. So yes, I confronted you, but I didn't think you'd push me. I didn't think it would go viral. I didn't think." Sarah trailed off. "I don't know what I thought. Karen was crying again, but this time it felt different. Not the crying of someone whose life had been exposed, but the crying of someone who was actually hearing what they'd done. "Why are you telling me this?" Karen whispered. "Because I watched what happened after," Sarah said. "I watched the internet destroy you, and I watched you disappear, and I watched everyone celebrate your fall. And somewhere in all of that, I realized something. I'm not any better than you. I got righteous, I got self-righteous, and I created a moment that's been used to destroy you completely. The harassment you're getting, it's insane. There's a subreddit dedicated to finding your address. People are showing up at your house. I saw a video of someone throwing eggs at your mailbox." Karen hadn't seen that. She'd stopped looking. "I need you to know something," Sarah continued. "I didn't mean for it to go this far, and I'm sorry." It was an apology no one else would give her. Everyone else would stay convinced of her guilt, would use her as an example, would move on to the next scandal. But Sarah Chen, the person who'd started all of this, was apologizing. "Why would you apologize?" Karen asked. "You were right, I was lying." "You were lying," Sarah agreed. "But destroying you wasn't the right response to that. Do you know what I've realized? The internet doesn't want accountability, it wants blood. And I handed it to them on a silver platter. I became part of a machine that has now traumatized you more than your dishonesty ever would have traumatized anyone." Karen couldn't speak. "I'm not saying what you did was okay," Sarah said. "I'm saying that maybe it's time you actually tell the truth, not the version the internet has decided on, not the version that fits the narrative of a perfectly bad person. The actual truth, all of it." After Sarah hung up, Karen sat in the kitchen for a very long time. She thought about the moment she'd made the choice to become Karen Mitchell, the influencer, rather than Karen Mitchell the person. She'd been maybe 26 or 27, working as a marketing coordinator, living in an apartment that smelled like mildew, wondering if this was all life had to offer. She'd been ordinary, and ordinariness had felt like death. So she'd created someone extraordinary. She'd read voraciously about what people wanted, what they aspired to, what they believed would make them happy. And then she'd become that thing. The perfect morning routine, the perfect meals, the perfect life. She'd been so good at it that eventually she'd believed it herself. Somewhere along the way, the performance and the performer had become indistinguishable. She wasn't pretending to be Karen Mitchell anymore. She was Karen Mitchell, and she was a lie. At 8:00 a.m., Karen opened a Google Doc on her laptop. She stared at a blank page for a long time. Then slowly she began to type. Not a statement, not a defense, not a carefully worded crisis communication designed to rehabilitate her image. The truth. She typed for 8 hours. She wrote about the inheritance from her father that she'd used to jumpstart her blog. She wrote about the therapist she'd been seeing who'd warned her that she was developing a dissociative relationship with her own image, and how she'd fired that therapist instead of listening. She wrote about the times she'd actually tested her advice and found it hollow, but posted about it anyway because her followers expected her to have all the answers. She wrote about hearing her first assistant and how that moment had been the beginning of the end, not because having help was inherently dishonest, but because that's when she'd realized she could outsource her life and no one would notice. She wrote about the times she'd recommended products she'd never used, the times she'd posted photos of meals she'd never eaten, the times she'd written about emotional breakthroughs that were actually just well-timed therapy sessions edited into aphorisms. She wrote about the shame, the constant, grinding shame of maintaining a lie so enormous that it required total commitment, the way that shame had calcified into rage, the way she'd learned to treat everyone around her, her husband, her assistant, her followers, as supporting players in her narrative rather than actual people. She wrote about the parking lot incident not as an aberration, but as an inevitability. She'd built a life so fundamentally dishonest that a moment of actual accountability would naturally produce violence. The lie had finally confronted her, and she hadn't known how to respond with anything other than aggression. By 4:00 p.m., she had written 12,000 words. She titled it, "The Architect of My Own Destruction, Why Everything I Told You Was a Lie, and Why I'm Finally Ready to Tell You the Truth." She didn't edit it, she didn't workshop it. She didn't have her lawyer review it for liability. She just posted it. She posted it to her blog, to Medium, to Twitter as a thread, to Instagram as a long caption. She sent it to every major outlet that had been covering the story, and then she turned off her phone and waited. The response was immediate. Some people didn't believe her. They thought it was a manipulation tactic, a way of appearing vulnerable to rebuild her image. They'd already decided what she was, and the truth would fit into that narrative whether it was convenient or not. But some people did something else. They actually read it, and they listened. The headline appeared first on a smaller blog. Influencer Corinne Mitchell publishes full confession. I built my empire on lies and I'm sorry. Then it was picked up by larger outlets. After days of silence, Corinne Mitchell admits everything. And then something unexpected happened. People started talking not about whether she was good or bad, but about the system that had incentivized her dishonesty in the first place. People started examining their own parasocial relationships with influencers. Therapists started writing articles about dissociation and performance. Journalists started investigating how many other influencers had similar inconsistencies. For the first time, Corinne Mitchell became less about Corinne Mitchell and more about something larger. The reception wasn't forgiveness. Corinne didn't expect forgiveness and wouldn't have accepted it. It was acknowledgement. It was complexity. It was the possibility, maybe, of something other than just destruction. Not from Sarah Chen. Sarah had declined to press charges for the parking lot assault, which surprised Corinne until she understood why. Sarah had realized that criminal charges against Corinne would only feed the machine further. What Sarah wanted was for Corinne to actually be held accountable, not destroyed. The lawsuit came from her followers. A class action suit filed on behalf of approximately 300,000 people who claimed they'd been defrauded by her wellness courses and product recommendations. The suit alleged that Corinne had engaged in systematic deception, recommending products in which she had undisclosed financial interests, offering medical advice without proper qualifications, and marketing her courses under false pretenses. The lawsuit would take years to resolve, Corinne's lawyer explained. It would require extensive discovery. It would likely result in significant financial penalties. It might result in criminal charges if the prosecutors decided that intent to defraud could be proven. Corinne had stopped listening by the middle of the explanation. She'd already decided something during the weeks of the confession's aftermath. She was going to accept whatever came, not as a strategy, there was no strategy anymore, but as an actual acceptance of the consequences of her actions. David, however, had not accepted anything. We need to fight this, he said, sitting across from the lawyer and Corinne in the conference room of their house. We need to mount a vigorous defense. These people are trying to retroactively decide that your advice was fraudulent. But advice is inherently subjective. No one can say definitively that your recommendations didn't help them. Some of them did help people, Corinne said quietly. David ignored her. We can argue that you're a content creator, not a medical professional. We can argue that anyone who took your advice had a responsibility to do their own research. We can argue that. I don't want to fight it, Corinne said. David stopped. I don't want to fight it, Corinne repeated. I want to settle. I want to acknowledge the harm. I want to work with the plaintiffs to understand what actually hurt them, and then I want to compensate them. That's financial suicide, David said flatly. I know, Corinne replied. That's admitting to all of the allegations. That's not strategic. I know, Corinne said again. Corinne, you're not thinking clearly. You're in a fragile psychological state. You need to let us handle this professionally. Corinne looked at her husband. The man she'd married 16 years ago, the man she'd built this life with, the man who'd become so accustomed to living within her constructed reality that he'd actually forgotten the difference between strategy and honesty. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, Corinne said quietly. And I'm not doing this for you anymore, David. I'm not doing this for my image or my career or anyone else. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do, and I can't spend the rest of my life pretending I didn't know that. David stood up. I'm calling our mediation attorney. We might need to discuss a separation. He left the room. Corinne didn't try to stop him. The settlement process took 4 months. Corinne sold the investment property. She liquidated her investment accounts. She and David agreed to sell the house, splitting the proceeds according to their prenup, which suddenly seemed less like a document designed to protect themselves and more like an artifact of two people who'd never actually trusted each other. The settlement itself was $2.3 million, split among the 300,000 plaintiffs. It worked out to an average of about $7,600 per person, not insignificant, but not life-changing. But the money was just the financial aspect. Karen also established a fund dedicated to auditing wellness claims online. She provided testimony to the FTC about influencer verification and accountability. She published a series of essays about the psychology of performance in the digital age and how the incentive structures of social media actively rewarded dishonesty. She also hired a private investigator to look into something that had been nagging at her since she'd read her own confession again. The therapist she'd fired, Dr. Elizabeth Morrison. She wanted to know if Dr. Morrison was still seeing clients, if Karen had cost her any business, if she needed to make amends. Dr. Morrison had kept seeing clients. She'd actually referenced the Karen Mitchell situation in her research about dissociation, though without naming Karen. She'd written papers about it. Karen was, in some small way, contributing to the advancement of mental health understanding, not by succeeding, but by failing so completely that there was useful data in her failure. Karen called her. The conversation was strange and difficult, and nothing like Karen had rehearsed it in her head. "I'm not calling to get you to absolve me," Karen said at the beginning. "I'm calling to tell you that you were right and I should have listened." "I'm aware that I was right," Dr. Morrison replied. "I watched the same internet everyone else did." It wasn't kind, but it was honest, and Karen had earned that. They did meet eventually. Not as therapist and patient, Karen had found a new therapist, one she'd researched carefully and approached with genuine vulnerability, but as two people trying to understand something. "Do you know what you were most afraid of?" Dr. Morrison asked during their meeting. "Failure," Karen said immediately. Before that, Dr. Morrison pressed, "Deeper." Karen thought, "Ordinariness." "Yes," Dr. Morrison said. "You were terrified of being ordinary, so you built something extraordinary. And when you realized that the extraordinary thing was a lie, you didn't realize that ordinariness, actual human ordinariness, might be valuable in itself." The words stayed with Karen for a long time. By month 7 after the confession, Karen had officially retired from influencer culture. She'd deleted her social media accounts. She'd stopped creating content. She'd stopped trying to be Karen Mitchell, the aspirational figure. Instead, she'd taken a job at a nonprofit focused on digital literacy and media education. It didn't pay well. It didn't have prestige. No one recognized her. She worked in an office that smelled like old coffee and had outdated computers, helping teach teenagers how to identify misinformation and think critically about what they consumed online. It was the least glamorous job she'd ever had. It was also the first job where she could look herself in the mirror without feeling anything other than acceptance. David had moved into an apartment and was seeing someone new, a woman from his office who apparently did not own a single item specifically purchased for aesthetic purposes. His lawyer was handling the divorce proceedings. There was no acrimony exactly, but there was a fundamental recognition that they'd been performing a relationship rather than living one. They'd been very good at the performance, but the performance had finally ended. Karen had moved into a small apartment in a less prestigious neighborhood. She'd furnished it without considering how it would photograph. She'd decorated it based on what actually made her feel comfortable. The decor was simple, unremarkable, the kind of apartment that no one would ever ask to feature in a magazine. It was exactly what she needed. The moment of actual reckoning came on a Tuesday evening, 8 months after the parking lot incident. Karen was grocery shopping, something she now did for actual meals that she would actually eat, when she ran into Sarah Chen in the produce section. They recognized each other immediately. "Hi," Sarah said, and there was something uncertain in her voice, as though she wasn't sure how this conversation would go. "Hi," Karen replied. I wanted to reach out months ago, but I didn't think you wanted to hear from me." "I had a complicated time with it," Sarah admitted. "For a while I felt responsible for what happened to you. I felt like I'd weaponized accountability against you. But then I realized something. The internet was always going to do what it did. I didn't create that mechanism, I just triggered it." "You did do that," Karen said. "But you were also right, I needed to be confronted." Sarah picked up a bell pepper and examined it. "I quit my job as a trainer," she said. "I'm back in data science. I'm working for a company that analyzes social media algorithms. I'm trying to understand how the systems we've built actively incentivize lying." "That seems important," Karen said. It is, Sarah agreed. She looked at Karen directly. I've been reading your essays, the ones you published for the nonprofit. Are they okay? Karen asked, and she realized she was actually asking, not performing. She genuinely wanted to know what Sarah thought. They're good, Sarah said. They're honest. That's probably the biggest difference from your old work. They're actually honest. You admit when you don't know things. You admit when you were wrong. It's strange to read. Karen smiled, a real smile, not the carefully constructed one she'd been manufacturing for years. Everyone said it would be a better strategy to deny everything, to fight the narrative, to rebuild my image. Are you glad you didn't? Sarah asked. I'm not sure if I'm glad, Karen said, considering. But I know I'm better, and that seems like it should count for something. They stood in the produce section for a few more minutes, not quite friends, but no longer enemies. Just two people who'd been thrust into each other's stories and had to figure out how to exist in that collision. When they parted, Sarah said, "For what it's worth, I believe you're actually changing. I don't think you're doing it for PR. I think you're actually doing the work." Thank you, Karen said. I needed to hear that. But what Karen actually needed was already there. It was in the apartment she lived in alone, in the job that didn't pay well, in the relationships that were being rebuilt slowly on foundations of actual honesty rather than performance. It was in the mirror where she saw herself without filters, without the construction of aspirational imagery, just a woman who had been wrong and was trying to be less wrong. It wasn't redemption. Redemption would have been the easy narrative, the feel-good arc where she learned her lesson and emerged as a better person. What she had instead was something harder and realer, the slow, unglamorous work of becoming someone who actually meant what she said. 1 year after the parking lot incident, Karen sat in her apartment and reread her confession. It was strange to encounter it now. The words were the same, but she'd changed enough that it felt like reading someone else's thoughts. The person who'd written that essay had been in shock, still riding the adrenaline of exposure, still processing the collapse of everything she'd built. There was honesty in it, yes, but there was also still something performative, a confession structured to demonstrate growth, written by someone who'd spent so long performing that even the act of admitting performance was performed. She'd mentioned this to her new therapist, Dr. Amira Okonkwo, during their weekly sessions. Is that a problem? Dr. Okonkwo had asked. I don't know, Karen had replied. I'm honest now, but how do I know I'm not just performing honesty? How do I know I'm not just playing the role of a reformed person? You probably will never know entirely, Dr. Okonkwo had said. None of us can be certain about the purity of our motivations. The question isn't whether you're performing, it's whether you're in alignment with what you're saying, whether your actions match your words. Actions match words. Karen had spent the year testing that principle constantly. When the lawsuit settlement had been finalized, several news outlets had asked her to comment. She declined every interview request, recognizing it as the first test. If she appeared on camera, if she told her story in exactly the right way, if she performed her redemption arc properly, she could probably rebuild some version of her image. People loved stories about people who'd been broken and rebuilt themselves. She could monetize this version of herself. She'd said no to all of it. Instead, she'd kept working at the nonprofit. She'd taken a small pay cut so that the organization could hire an additional educator. She'd volunteered to train other people in her role so that they could expand their reach. She'd done the work that had no audience and no benefit to her image. The nonprofit had asked her if she wanted to be featured in their annual report, credited for her contributions. She'd asked to remain anonymous. Why? The executive director, Marcus, had asked with genuine confusion. You're making a real difference here. Don't you want people to know that you've changed? I want to do the work, Karen had replied. I don't need people to know I'm doing it. The need for people to know I'm doing things is kind of the whole problem, actually. David had paid his share of the settlement without complaint. He'd also asked her, through his lawyer, if they could discuss the possibility of reconciliation. She'd declined. They'd done too much damage to each other, built too many lies into the foundation of their marriage. They could be civil now, and they would be, but they couldn't repair something that had never actually been real. The house had sold for $1.2 million, less than they would have gotten if they'd waited for a better market, but Karen hadn't wanted to wait. She'd wanted that symbol of her aspirational life dismantled quickly. The new owners had apparently gutted the interior design and made it actually livable. Karen tried not to derive too much satisfaction from that. Her mother had been unexpectedly supportive through the entire process. Corinne would have assumed that the daughter of a devout Methodist would be disappointed in her, would lecture her about honesty and values and the importance of family reputation. But her mother had surprised her. "I spent 50 years worrying about what people thought about me," her mother had said, calling Corinne the day after the settlement was finalized. "And I can tell you from experience, it's not worth the effort. I'm glad you're figuring that out before you're 70 years old." "You're not disappointed?" Corinne had asked. "Oh, I'm disappointed," her mother had said. "But not in the way you think. I'm disappointed that you ever believed that performing for strangers was more important than being honest with the people who love you. I'm disappointed that you forgot that somewhere along the way, but I'm not disappointed in who you're becoming." Corinne had started attending therapy with her mother once a month, trying to understand the patterns that had led her to seek approval above all things, to believe that there was a version of herself that would finally be enough if she just constructed it perfectly enough. "You were an anxious child," her mother had said during one of those sessions. "You worried constantly about doing things wrong. I think I tried to protect you too much by praising you whenever you did anything even slightly well. I think I inadvertently taught you that your worth was based on external validation." Dr. Okonkwo had helped Corinne see that this wasn't her mother's fault, nor Corinne's fault, but rather the product of how they'd all been socialized in a culture that equated success with worth. Corinne had just taken it to its logical extreme. By month 14, Corinne had received an interesting job offer. A book publisher wanted her to write a memoir about her rise and fall. They were offering significant money, more than she'd made in any single year from her blog at its height. They wanted the full story, the redemption arc, the journey from broken to whole. Corinne had almost said yes. She could see it so clearly, the book jacket designed to appeal to both people who wanted to read about her failure and people who wanted to read about her recovery. The book tour where she'd talk about her journey. The TED Talk eventually. The second chance, the reinvention, the comeback narrative that always sold so well. She discussed it with Dr. Okonkwo. "What would you be doing if you wrote this book?" Dr. Okonkwo had asked. Corinne had stopped. She would be performing again. Not consciously, probably, but the incentive structures were already there. The money, the platform, the validation. And even if she tried to tell the truth, the market would shape that truth into a narrative that was comfortable for consumption. "I can't," Corinne had told the publisher. "I'm sorry, I don't think I'm ready to tell this story publicly. I don't think I ever will be." The publisher had seemed confused. They'd offered more money. Corinne had declined again. Sarah Chen had continued her work in algorithmic analysis, and they'd become something like friends. They'd have dinner sometimes, and Sarah would talk about her research into how social media platforms were literally designed to reward certain kinds of dishonesty. Corinne would listen, and sometimes they'd commiserate about the systems they were both trying to work around now. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah had asked during one of these dinners. "Confronting me in the parking lot, setting off this entire chain of events?" "No," Sarah had answered immediately. "You needed to be confronted. I needed you to be confronted for my own sanity. I don't regret that, but I regret how it spiraled. I regret that I contributed to the machinery of internet destruction." "We all did," Corinne had said. "Everyone who watched the video and shared it and commented on it contributed to it. I'm not going to make you carry responsibility that belongs to the entire culture." "The entire culture," Sarah had repeated thoughtfully. "That's much harder to blame." By the end of year one, Corinne had made a decision that surprised her. She was going to forgive herself. Not because she'd done anything to deserve forgiveness, not because enough time had passed or she'd suffered enough consequences, but because the ongoing act of self-punishment had become another form of self-centered performance. She was performing penance now, performing redemption, performing contrition. And while those were better performances than the ones she'd been doing before, they were still performances. The real work of change wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was just about living differently, day by day, choice by choice, until the different way of living became simply the way she lived. On the one-year anniversary of the parking lot incident, Corinne did something she'd never done before. She reached out to a local news station and offered to do an interview. "I don't want to tell you my story," she told the reporter, a sharp woman named Diane Reeves. "But I want to talk about the moment and what it revealed about us, not about me specifically, but about all of us." What do you mean? Diane had asked. I mean that I created a false version of myself and people chose to believe in it and follow it and invest in it, Karen had said. That's not just on me. That's on all of us. We want influencers to be better than we are. We want them to have all the answers. We want to outsource our own self-improvement to them so we don't have to do the work ourselves. The parking lot incident revealed the lie in me, but it also revealed something in everyone who watched it. What's that? Diane had pressed. That we love destruction more than we love truth, Karen had said quietly. If people actually cared about the truth, they would have been relieved that someone was finally being honest. But instead, they wanted to see me destroyed. They wanted their worst suspicions about people like me confirmed, and that's not my problem to solve, but it's all of our problem. The interview had been brief and thoughtful, nothing like the sensational coverage of the original incident. It had been shared reasonably, but not virally. It hadn't rehabilitated Karen's image or created any kind of comeback narrative. It had just been one person saying something true and then moving on with her life. Which was, perhaps, the most radical thing she'd done yet. 2 years after the parking lot incident, Karen received a message from a follower. Not a current follower, she had none of those now, but someone who had been following her during her influencer days, someone who had taken her courses, someone who had tried to live by her advice. The message was sent through the nonprofit's email system, having found her name on the organization's staff page. Hi Karen, I don't know if you remember me or if you get messages like this anymore, but I needed to reach out. My name is Michelle Torres. I took your complete wellness course 3 years ago when I was going through a really hard time. I followed your advice to the letter. I changed my whole life around what you were telling me to do. I'm not writing this to blame you or anything. I'm writing this because I need to tell you what happened. I followed your advice about replacing medication with meditation for about 6 months. I had anxiety, really severe anxiety, and you talked about how pharmaceutical interventions interfere with your body's natural ability to heal. So I stopped taking my meds. I meditated. I did your breathing exercises, and I got worse, so much worse. I ended up in the hospital during a panic attack, and a doctor told me that I'd been lucky. If I'd waited much longer, I might have had a cardiac event. I was furious at you for months. I blamed you for everything, and I still think you did harm. I think your advice was genuinely dangerous. But here's the thing. I read your confession, and I read your follow-up essays, and I read what you've been doing with the nonprofit. And I realized something. I was using you the same way you were using me. I was giving you responsibility for my health, my life, my decisions. I was outsourcing my agency to you, because it was easier than making my own choices and accepting the consequences. I've been in therapy for a while now, and I've rebuilt my life in a more sustainable way. I'm back on medication. I meditate sometimes too, but I don't think meditation is going to cure my anxiety. I'm managing it with a combination of medication, therapy, lifestyle changes, and self-compassion. And I'm writing this to tell you, I forgive you. Not because what you did was okay, but because I'm choosing to move forward without carrying anger about it. I also wanted to let you know that I've been thinking about what you said in your work, about how the systems we've built actively reward dishonesty. I'm a software engineer, and I'm starting to think about how we could design systems differently. I'm reading research about digital literacy and platform design. Your fall has become kind of a catalyst for me doing better work in my field, so I guess I wanted to thank you. This is weird. I wanted to thank you for failing so spectacularly that it made me think about these things differently. Karen read the message 3 times before she realized she was crying. She showed it to Dr. Okonkwo during their next session. How do you feel about it? Dr. Okonkwo had asked. I don't know, Karen had said. Grateful, guilty that I'm grateful. Worried that I'm feeling glad she forgave me because that means I can feel less guilty. It's complicated. It is complicated, Dr. Okonkwo had agreed. But notice that the actual resolution to the situation wasn't about you at all. She didn't need your forgiveness or your apology to move on. She did the work herself. She figured out how to take responsibility for her own choices while also acknowledging that you'd done harm. That's the healthiest possible outcome. She also says she's doing work to prevent other people from being harmed by systems like the ones I exploited, Karen had noted. Yes, Dr. Okonkwo had confirmed. That's the actual positive outcome here, not your redemption, but the structural change that might prevent the next person from being harmed by the next influencer who hasn't done their work yet. Karen had replied to Michelle's message personally, keeping it brief and honest. Thank you for writing this. Thank you for doing the work to rebuild your life in a way that actually serves you. And thank you for channeling your experience into work that might help prevent others from being harmed. That's the most important thing any of us can do with our pain. She'd almost deleted that last paragraph, worried that it sounded preachy or like she was trying to encourage a narrative. But she'd sent it anyway. Sometimes being honest meant being a little uncomfortable. By year 2.5, the nonprofit had expanded to 3 new cities. Corinne had been promoted to director of training, which meant she was helping develop curriculum to teach media literacy and algorithmic literacy to teenagers. She'd started speaking at conferences, not about her personal redemption story, but about the structural incentives that led to the kind of deception she'd engaged in. She'd become what people called a thought leader in the space of digital ethics and platform accountability, which was ironic given her past, but she'd made peace with the irony. The work was frustrating. The platforms didn't want to be held accountable. The venture capitalists who funded some platforms had no interest in designing systems that weren't profitable, and truthfulness was rarely the most profitable design choice. The algorithms were so complex that sometimes even the engineers who'd built them didn't fully understand how they functioned. But the work was important, and it was real. Corinne had also, somewhat unexpectedly, become close friends with Sarah Chen. They'd started having dinner once a week, these sessions where they'd talk about their work, about algorithms, about the culture of perfection and performance, about what it meant to try to live honestly in a world designed to reward dishonesty. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't confronted you in the parking lot?" Sarah had asked during one of these dinners. "Every day," Corinne had admitted. "I think I would have kept going. I would have kept escalating the dishonesty to maintain the image. I would have probably destroyed myself eventually anyway, but it would have taken longer and been worse." "I saved you," Sarah had said, only half joking. "You did," Corinne had agreed. "In a way that the internet couldn't possibly understand, you saved me." "The internet wants everything to be binary," Sarah had continued. "Good people and bad people, lies and truth. There's no room for the complexity of a moment where someone does something right for complicated reasons that also cause damage." "So what do we do about that?" Corinne had asked. "I don't know," Sarah had admitted. "Keep trying to have nuanced conversations in a platform ecosystem designed to punish nuance. Keep failing to reach people who have already decided what they believe. Keep doing the work anyway." Which was, Corinne thought, probably the best answer anyone could give. By the 3rd anniversary of the parking lot incident, Corinne had given 17 talks, published a book chapter on algorithmic bias and influencer culture, and helped develop a curriculum that had been implemented in 43 schools across the country. The curriculum didn't mention her specifically, but it was built on the principles she'd learned through her own failure. She'd also, much to her surprise, started dating someone. His name was Jack. He was a therapist who worked in the nonprofit sector. He had no social media accounts. He wore clothes that didn't match his image. He had no interest in performance. "Why do you want to date me?" Corinne had asked him early on. "Don't you know about my past?" "Yes," Jack had said. "I've read your essays. I've looked into what happened. And I'm interested in you because you've clearly done significant work to understand yourself, and that work is ongoing, and you're not pretending that you've figured it all out." "But I'm going to disappoint you eventually," Corinne had warned him. "You're eventually going to realize that I'm not actually as evolved as I seem, and that I still have a lot of problematic patterns." "Probably," Jack had agreed. "Just like you'll probably eventually realize that I'm not actually as functional as I appear to be in professional settings. That's kind of how relationships work. You find someone whose dysfunction is reasonably compatible with your own, and you try to help each other get less dysfunctional." Corinne had tried very hard not to fall in love with him, but she had anyway. On the 3rd anniversary of the parking lot incident, the date marked by absolutely no public recognition, Corinne sat in the small apartment she now shared with Jack and thought about time and change, and the kinds of growth that happen so slowly you can't see it happening. She wasn't the same person who'd been in that parking lot, but she also wouldn't have claimed to be better. She'd made different choices and lived with different consequences. She'd done work to understand herself and her patterns. She'd committed to honesty, which was harder and less rewarding than she'd ever anticipated. But she could look at herself in the mirror now and actually recognize the person looking back. Her mother had asked her once, during one of their therapy sessions together, if she regretted any of it. The rise, the fall, all of it. "I regret the dishonesty," Karen had said. "I regret the harm I caused, but I don't think I'd be here without having gone through it. So do I regret the path? I don't know. I'm just grateful I'm on a different path now." Her mother had squeezed her hand and said, "That's all any of us can ask for." The parking lot has long since moved on from Karen Mitchell. Other stories have captured the internet's attention. Other influencers have been exposed. Other people have learned various forms of lessons about what happens when you build your life on foundation of untruth. But sometimes, if you search deep enough in certain corners of the internet, you can still find the original video. 47 million views, 700,000 comments. The moment preserved in digital amber, immortalized as the moment Karen Mitchell's carefully constructed world collapsed. If you read those comments now, years later, some of them haven't aged well. Some of them are cruel in ways that seem excessive. Some of them are from people who used Karen's fall as material for their own content, their own rise. The machinery that had consumed Karen has since consumed others. But some of the comments are different. Some people looking back have written things like, "I used to be angry at her, but after reading what she did after all this, I realized she actually did the work. Not for PR, but actually did the work. That matters." Or, "This moment taught me something about myself and the internet. Made me think about why I wanted her to be destroyed so badly." Or simply, "She's not the same person now." Karen doesn't read these comments. She stopped reading most comments. But she knows they exist, and sometimes she thinks about what it means that the narrative around the parking lot incident has, over time, become more complicated and more human. It's not redemption. Karen has accepted that redemption isn't actually what happened to her. What happened was accountability followed by incremental change, followed by the slow, unglamorous work of becoming someone different. It's not justice, though some people might call it that. It's just what happens when you finally stop performing and start actually living. When the moment of exposure becomes, not the end of your story, but the beginning of an actual story. In the parking lot that day, with dozens of phones recording, no one knew that the real moment of change wouldn't be visible. It would happen in therapy sessions and quiet conversations, and the decision to walk away from money and platforms and the validation of crowds. The cameras caught the moment she fell, but they couldn't film the years of climbing, hand over hand, towards something that looked like honesty.